welcome to Denying Atheism. My name is Andrew, and this is a YouTube channel dedicated to denying what atheists claim to be true about faith, specifically Christianity. And this video that we're going to look at today is the very first video that I spoke of in my first video for this channel that launched this entire project and initiative and why I'm doing what we're doing today. And so I hope you enjoy it. I hope it spurs on great conversation for you and encourages your faith and allows for you to grow and to actually have not a debate, not a rebuttal, but just a resolve or something inside of you that would allow for you to speak truth into these conversations whenever these topics come up under these unique scenarios. And so today we look at a TED Talk about the future of religion. And I just got to give you fair warning here about the talk that we're going to watch. The TED Talk is graphic in nature. There's some F words. There's some sexual explicit material discussed or metaphors that are used, and so the communicator is very inappropriate. So if you're watching today with children, I recommend you don't, or at least you watch it before you show it to them so you know where to fast forward. I probably wouldn't let my 13-year-old see this. I don't know at what age. I'll let the parent determine at what age you should be able to let their kids watch this, but watch it first if you are a parent, and then maybe let your kids see it later, certain parts, because there really are some very inappropriate moments in the TED Talk. With that said, I like TED Talks. The reason I have seen this is because I like TED Talks. And when I went to go research the topic of the future of religion and came across this video on TED Talks, I was excited about it because normally a TED Talk means that somebody has thought through their principles, has thought through what they're going to say, and they're going to communicate it in an effective way and in a timely way. And so I was like, this is going to be great. And I was really disappointed. So I want you to remember that I am not against TED Talks. I'm not against the whole initiative of TED Talks, but it's shocking that this person with this little information and knowledge about religion in general had this opportunity and this platform with TED Talks. It's mind-blowing, to be quite honest. So here's how this is going to work today, and this is how it works with all the videos. What we're going to do is watch a portion of the talk, and then I'm going to butt in. I'm going to be right here in my kitchen and break down what he said and then tell you the truth behind it. So he's going to say something. He's going to say X, and I'm going to say, yeah, but Y and Z. Okay, so that's how this is going to work. So it'll be him for like a couple minutes, then me, him for a couple minutes, then me, and it's going to be that kind of movement throughout the video. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe as I update these monthly. We'll have new videos dealing with different topics and different things. I even have a special Christmas idea planned for us with Christopher Hitchens. So subscribe so you can get an update when these videos come out. All right, here we go.
Hi, hello, and welcome to the future of religion, the biggest mistake in the history of mankind. But before we start, I have done research yesterday. The TEDx guys from Königsallee have invited me, and I have done research yesterday to find an answer to one of the most important questions in the history of mankind: which is better, Altbier or Kölsch? And it is Altbier, definitely. It is much better than Kölsch. Okay. The title of my second book, by the way, is Ich hab Geisterblitz. Wallah, wallah, ich hab Geisterblitz. You have to say it like this. Okay, my name is Philipp Möller. But since there is no Ö in the English language, just call me Phil. As you may have already noticed, I am an atheist, and there is three main reasons for that. The first reason is, as everybody on this world, I was born without the belief in a God. And since no one taught me to, I am still a natural-born atheist. It's really that simple. The second reason is, I am a teacher's son, and as a teacher's son, I am a natural-born smartass. I love to correct people really. And I love asking uncomfortable questions like, what the heck are you talking about? Which is a very common question with priests and religion teachers. And the third reason is I am a Berliner. And we Berliners traditionally don't give a fuck about clerical bullshit. So fuck you, clerics. We know you made God up to control people, but you're not going to control us. Or the other 82% of young Europeans who say, I don't need a God.
I told you. He gets right to it, doesn't he? He's a wild one, that Phil. Okay, so let's deal with two of the things that he claimed, first off, right off the bat, about religion in general. Number one, that he was born without a knowledge of God. Just like everybody else on the whole planet is born without this knowledge of God. Well, exactly the opposite is true. Now, the simplest way to deal with this is to think for yourself with very limited knowledge. Like, I'm talking what is it, 8th grade world history knowledge, right? You can do this. Think about the indigenous people groups historically or in modern context, okay, who have no established religion. So today there's about 4,000 people groups that have no knowledge of Christianity at all, for example. So there's these people groups have no knowledge of religion at all or God, no established church, right? You can think about again, modern and historical. Would they or have they made up or imagined or pretended or groped or longed for a God? Yes. 100% of the time, yes. In fact, you'll never meet a Christian missionary who went to a people group without a government and without an established church that was atheist. They all have a God. Whether they make nature into God like the Hindus have done, like the Indians have done, like the Wazoo in Colombia have done, and like many African countries or indigenous people have done, whether they make nature into a God or they make up a God, every people group in the history of humanity has longed for God. Like there's something inside of them that is not atheist, it's deist at the best, right? It's deist. So something inside of every human being born on this planet longs for God. So Phil's completely wrong. It ignores science, it ignores anthropology, it ignores sociology, it ignores just basic stuff, right? He just ignores it for the sake of his argument. The second thing he says is, we know clerics who created God to control people. This is really easy to deal with. That is completely false. First off, it's irrational, and we'll deal more with it later because he's going to say it repeatedly. But just to think about it, think about the most controlling people in the world today. It is not the Americans, who you would probably say have the predominant Christian culture. There's a lot of Christians in America, and it mostly is. And I know nuns are on the rise and all that, but for the most part, we're pretty much a religious country, right? It's not going to be America. It's not going to be Europe, right? It's not going to be England, right? And I know it's on decline there, but still you would say its roots are predominantly religious. No, the most controlling countries today and throughout modern history, right, are going to be the Nazi Germans. The Chinese today are very controlling. They're burning churches if you don't preach the government standard religion, right, which is atheism. And the North Koreans, extremely controlling. And all three of those have one thing in common, and that is atheism. So no, it's not religion that controls people. It's atheism, actually, that controls people. Just look at the basic, politics of today. Just take a brief look with what limited knowledge you have. Look up Wikipedia, do whatever you want, but you will find that it's not religion that controls people. It's atheistic governments that control people. So again, Phil is just, as he will do for the next several minutes, speaking out of complete ignorance on this topic. So no, clerics did not create religion to control people. Atheism, though, did create government to control people, and it leveraged religion to do it too.
Okay, during my studies, at one time, I had to finally decide what to do with my life and how to earn money. And I remember clearly that day where I thought, well, maybe I could be a professional atheist. And this is what I am now. Here I am, right? I'm working for the Giordano Bruno Foundation, which is a think tank for enlightenment and humanism. I write books, as you know. And when I was thinking about the question of the future of religion, I was remembering a quote from Terry Pratchett. You know him. He said, if you don't know where you come from, then you don't know where you are. And if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you are going. And if you don't know where you are going, you're probably going wrong. And since going wrong in terms of religion mean to probably blow up the whole planet or slaughter half of mankind, I think we should take a close look to the history of religion, then the present of religion, and then the future of religion. I am not a history teacher, so let me get straight to the point. The history of religion is a history of stupidity, cruelty, and of terror. I mean, it sounds hard, really, but you may say now, hey, Phil, come on, there's many religions and they are very different. You're absolutely right. There are many religions, but they all have one thing in common. They are all terribly wrong. And by all, I mean every one of them. And by terribly, I mean that it's almost tragic how religion seems to prevent people from thinking, and this is very, very bad.
Okay, two things again that he spoke of. Well, number one, he's not a history teacher, so he's not qualified any more than you or I, probably less than me, but any more than you and I on when it comes to the topic of religion and the history of religion. He's just, again, speaking out of just no authority, speaking with no authority on the subject at all. And then he makes a very bold statement saying that religion leads to people not thinking, or he says religion prevents people from thinking is the actual word he uses, the words he uses there, and he qualifies it. You know what a qualifying statement is? Listen for these, and I won't take the time to deal with every single one of them, but he qualifies it with, and this is very bad. So his qualification again has no evidence, it has no standard, it has nothing it's built upon. It's just, this is very bad. You know, this is not good. You know, it's really, really weak. We call it a straw man argument. But I took the time just to make a brief list, and then I made a briefer list so this whole YouTube video wouldn't be a list of the people who were great thinkers in the history of Christianity. Think back to 1175 to 1253. There's a guy named Robert Grosseteste in the first half of the 13th century, and he's considered the founder of scientific thought at Oxford. He affirmed that experiments should be used in order to verify a theory, testing its consequences, and added greatly to the development of the scientific method still used today. Nicole Oresime in 1323 to 1382, theologian and bishop. His many scientific contributions is the discovery to the curvature of light through atmospheric refraction. William Turner, sometimes he's called the father of English botany, was also an ornithologist. He was arrested for preaching in favor of the Reformation. So he's not even Catholic. He's a reformer who's willing to go to prison for the belief that God's word is powerful and strong and everybody should have access to it. Francis Bacon, 1561 to 1626, considered among the fathers of empiricism and is credited with establishing the inductive method of experimental science. Galileo, an Italian astronomer, physicist, engineer, philosopher, and mathematician who also played a major role in the scientific revolution during the Renaissance. A Christian. Blaise Pascal, well known for Pascal's law of physics in 1632 to 1662, also a Christian. One man once said, "Gravity explains the motions of the planet, but it cannot explain the planets in motion. God governs all things and knows all things. That is, or can be, done." He said that in the 1600s. His name was Isaac Newton, a prominent scientist during the scientific revolution, a physicist and the discoverer of gravity, a Christian. Johannes Kepler, 1571 to 1630, a prominent astronomer of the scientific revolution, discovered Kepler's law of planetary motion, also a Christian. Lisa Minter, a German, Phil, you should know her, was part of a team that discovered nuclear fission, for which part Otto Hahn won a Nobel Prize. Minter was born into a Jewish family in Vienna, but later converted to Christianity. She left her faith in Judaism and became a follower of Jesus, and she helped discover nuclear fission. But not only that, she was only the second woman to achieve a doctorate in physics from the University of Vienna and the first woman professor of physics in Germany before she was forced to leave during World War II. The chemical element miniaterium is named after her. She's a thinker and a Christian. Francis Collins, alive today, is a great example of somebody who's still thinking. He's a key scientist in the Human Genome Project, also a thinker. So no, it is not true that Christians don't think or people of religion think. People of religion do think. We're deep thinkers. We're profound thinkers. And so don't believe that religion keeps people from thinking. In fact, historically, and even in modern times, we've seen that to not be true.
I admit there's very different forms of religion. For example, the ancient Viking gods. They are a bunch of cruel, invisible freaks. The ancient Egypt gods are a bunch of mummified, invisible freaks and crazy cats and dogs and stuff. The ancient Greek freaks are drunk and horny as hell, so I actually quite like them. Hinduism is a bunch of colorful, invisible freaks with many arms to hold you in exactly that social position you were born in. It's called the caste system, and it is based on Hinduism. Judaism is a set of silly rules that even 90% of the Jews don't follow. But at least they have a very good humor, so I won't tell you a rabbi joke. There's a person coming to a rabbi saying, "Rabbi, please, I have this urgent wish to live forever. What can I do?" The rabbi says, "Get married." "Really? I'll live forever then?" "No, but the wish will disappear." It's a pretty good joke. I like it. The clock is ticking, guys. So, speaking of love, Christianity, the religion of love, sounds awesome, guys, really, if we had just known that you meant the love to little kids. And Islam, finally, the religion of peace? Are you kidding me? Only Buddhism is a very sophisticated way of life for young and beautiful yoga girls. So I have nothing to complain about that.
Okay, one of the things Phil's doing, and he's still going to do it, but I just want to interrupt him real quick, is here's what he's doing. He's taking what's called the God of the Gaps. The gods of the gaps are, when we talked about earlier, how all of us kind of long for a God at birth, and so we create a God to fill in the gaps. So if we think we're lucky or prosperity because of luck, we will give a God to it, or we'll make up a religious notion to it, like karma. So it's called the God of the Gaps. If we can't understand where the smoke comes from off of a mountain because it's mist or something like that, we'll attribute a God to it. A fire, we'll call it a God. Lightning, we'll call it a God. And so we see many indigenous groups doing this. It's very, very common, and they're called God of the Gaps. It's ancient, and nobody believes in it. And the reason I know that nobody believes in it anymore is because, and this is just in general, when you look at the coexist sticker, all of us have seen the coexist sticker. I'm all for coexisting with everybody and being kind to one another. I think that's great. But one of the emblems you will not see on that sticker is Thor's hammer, right? It's nowhere to be seen because nobody believes in Greek mythology, right? Nobody believes in the Viking gods anymore. Nobody's fighting that fight anymore. And so these are not legitimate gods, right? They're not even on the same level of what we have is for modern religions today. So we can just eliminate that from the argument because it's really ridiculous. Now let's see the comparison. The comparison is that we have, let's say, for example, the God of Christianity. The God of Christianity, although there are some creation narratives and things like that in the Bible, the Bible does not take time to tell you that there's a God in the fire or there's a God on the mountain. There's a God who's behind all these things, but the point of the Bible is not to tell you to worship the mountain or to worship the smoke. The point of the Bible is to say there is one God and he has come to redeem us and save us from a deeper personal issue, and that's our evil and our sin. And it's the whole story of the Bible is about saving us from our sin and how God did that through the cross of Jesus. And so that's the point of the Bible. It's completely different from, say, the gods of the Vikings or the Greeks that he spoke of, or even the Buddhist karma system, or what the Hindus promote today.
except that it's an esoteric postcard philosophy which justifies the genocide of non-Buddhists. Okay, but stupidity is no excuse for what happened about 2,000 years ago, because when the people sat together to create one super mighty God, they actually weren't cruel or silly at all. You know, the architects of monotheism, when they wrote those weird lyrics of the Old Testament, they were sitting together to create one God to rule them all. And the Old Testament, by the way, is still considered by politicians and by priests and other criminals as the book of books. I don't know.
Okay, so Phil says that it took over 2,000 years ago that a group of men sat together and created monotheism, which is completely false. In fact, we know that monotheism started with Judaism, which started around, liberal estimates would say 1500 BC, before Jesus. More conservative would say 3000 BC, and there's even some evidence that it could have happened to 10,000 years before Jesus. And so monotheism has been around for much longer than 2,000 years. But there's another problem with that statement, that 2,000 years a group of men sat together and created the Bible, or created monotheism. And so here's another problem with that statement, that 2,000 years ago, around 2019 years ago, we believe that Jesus was born, give or take 4 years or so. And so Jesus was born at that time, and at that time, there was no New Testament. It was just Old Testament. In fact, it wasn't until many years later, probably around 40 AD or 60 AD, that we start seeing the writings of Paul. And John, the Apostle John, wrote the book of Revelation around 95, 100 AD. And so we really didn't see the beginnings of the New Testament until at least 50 years later, after Jesus was born. So it wasn't 2,000 years ago. And furthermore, there's another problem with this thing that he keeps saying, that we created a religion, that a group of men got together and made up a monotheistic faith that would, one, cause them to die, because they are creating something that's so revolutionary and countercultural, they're going to get killed for it by the government. So let's create that. That's logical. That's a good idea. No, that's ridiculous. The second reason it's illogical is because of this. Language. If today I use the words LOL in something I write, you would be able to guess 20, 50 years from now that, that was written around the late 2019, 2018, around that time. Maybe LOL carries all the way to 2025, right? But probably not. We'll probably move on from there by then. But you won't say 50 years from now that if you see a document with LOL in it, you won't say, that was written in 1997. Because that would be ridiculous, because we didn't say LOL in 1997. I know, I was alive and I didn't say it. We didn't even know it existed, that word, the combination of LOL, mean laugh out loud. We just didn't use that kind of terminology. You can apply those same principles to the Bible and any other historical document. In fact, we do it all the time to verify when something was written. And so when we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1945, they revealed to us the book of Isaiah, the book of Genesis, among many other books in the Old Testament. And they were dated back around 300, 400 years before Jesus. And they kept pointing back even further based on the language of the books. And so what they revealed to us was we got it right. Like, we got a lot of our Hebrew right. Some of it needed to be worked on, and so we made some corrections, and that's why we updated our Bibles. All that happened after the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We can apply the same thing to the New Testament. We can see that Paul wrote a different style than John, and John wrote a different style from Peter, and Mark wrote differently from Luke. And so we could tell the difference in these different writers, and we can determine who wrote what based on their writing style. I mean, you would say the same thing about your favorite author doesn't write the way a horrible author does, or a mediocre author or a decent author. Maybe you have a couple of guys you like and they all have a different style, and you're attuned to it because you read them often. But we apply those same principles to understand when something was written based on history. Okay, so it's ridiculous to assume then that these 66 books of the Bible that are considered part of the Bible were written in a one time period. It was obvious they were written during different seasons. In fact, they were written with 40 different authors, and a again, I'm going to be generous, kind of leaning towards maybe a less conservative view of the Bible. So let's just say a liberal view of the Bible. The Bible is written over a 2,000 year period. Like it took 2,000 years to write the Bible, at best. At best. I probably lean more conservatively and even push it even farther, saying there's probably took about 4,000 to 5,000 years to write the Bible. So even longer. And I don't say the earth is that old. Don't put me in that category. I'm just saying it took a long time to write the Bible. It's a collection of many, many books written over a long period of time by 40 different authors. And it all points again to Jesus. That's what the miracle of the Bible is it all has the same message, and that is that God came to save man from evil and sin and wickedness that he created, and so that we have created. And so he came to do that with Jesus. And so we believe in Jesus and we're saved. That's the message of the Bible, written by different authors over a long period of time. It's one of the beautiful things about it. And so to claim then that the Bible was written by a certain group of men at a certain period is ridiculous, or monotheism for that matter. Again, that is also ridiculous. Monotheism predates even the birth of Christ, right?
But the people back then were not silly at all, because they could look back on 1,500 years of Greek high culture. And the Greeks had it all. They had science, philosophy, and arts. The three pillars for a happy life without religion. The Greeks had democracy. Okay, that was kind of weird, to be honest. The Greeks had women's rights. The Greeks had women's rights. Okay, they were kind of different from today, but they were probably better than the women's rights today in Saudi Arabia, or in an African village, or in a Bavarian village.
Phil, you just made fun of the Greeks for their gods. You just made fun of them. You just talked about how they had their false gods, or they had their gods. And remember that? You're talking about the Viking gods and the Greek gods. So they had religion at this time of art and all these wonderful things that you're talking about. So their art actually expressed the religion. That's how we know they had it. Okay, so they had religion. But I want to talk to you about the women's rights that you just mentioned, how wonderful they were. I just want to show this to you. This isn't very hard to look up, by the way. But here's a couple of things about women's rights during the time of the first century. And before I say this, I want to say this about Christians' view of the women's rights. Christianity was a liberator to women. In fact, it was women who first reported that Jesus had been resurrected, which would have been scandalous in that culture. Nobody would have believed it, but the Bible valued women. We see women as leaders within the church. We see women as having a value and a voice within Christian culture, things that they couldn't have had in Greek culture. And maybe that was one of the reasons so many people were flocking to monotheism and Christianity in such a dark culture that they were in. But here's a couple of things that women didn't have the right to do, and that women had to do in the Greek culture around this time that you're speaking of. Number one, they couldn't own land. Women were not allowed to own land, therefore they couldn't generate any significant wealth that could be passed on from generation to generation. They weren't allowed to vote in whatever democracy system that they had. They were forced to marry at the ages of 13 or 14 years old. So a middle school girl would be forced to marry an older man. Very perverted, very disgusting. But yet that was the high Greek culture that you're speaking of there, Phil. Most common career for women. So if a woman wanted to go to work, or if she had to go to work, her best option was a prostitute. That was her best option. There were some slavery options she had. She could go into slavery if she wanted to, but prostitute would be one of the significant options that she would take on. They didn't have abortion in the Greek culture, but they did have they could kill the baby at birth. And so most often girls would be killed at birth because they were deemed useless to Roman culture. And so no, women's rights were not fantastic during this time. They were actually very atrocious, and it was Christianity that came along and saved many women from a very demoralizing culture.
They had public schools, they had swimming halls, they had healthcare, clean water, they had sex, drugs, and probably some kind of rock and roll. And then in the young and aspiring Roman Empire, some freaks gathered together to create one super mighty God. And in a short period of time, they have turned the flourishing garden of Europe into a dirty shithole called the Middle Ages, which lasted for 1,000 years.
Okay, so here we are again with the claim that Christianity or monotheism was started and it changed everything. Well, first off, you should know that although Christianity did start about 2,000 years ago, it didn't get legalized until about 300 years after Jesus. And so it wasn't until 300 years, so more like 1700 years ago, that we see the beginning of Christianity taking place. And so that statement is so false that it started 2,000 years ago. It didn't. It was 300 years underground in Roman culture before it was able to be lifted to the light by Constantine. Look it up, research it. You'll see the very same thing. And then you got to know this, that Rome didn't become like a Christian country. It was just simply legalized. Christianity was legalized and seemed valid with all the other religions. So they still had their Greek gods, and yet now they're saying, listen, you can have the Greek gods, but we can also have Jesus too. And so Jesus was thrown into the mix, but it wasn't like Rome was like going to church, right? It wasn't like it was celebrating Easter. I mean, pockets were, because there were Christians who, even though they could be persecuted and killed for their beliefs for the first 300 years, they became Christians. There were Christians coming to faith. So when they came out and was legalized, of course they're going to go to Easter and do all the things, but it wasn't like it was America in the 1950s, right? And so no, it's again just completely off base in saying that. But why did Rome fall? That's worth considering. And I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but let me just briefly say this. It wasn't because it was Christian. In fact, it was Unitarian, much like America is, and most European countries are. It's very Unitarian. It believed in all the religions, and coexist was the bumper sticker on the chariots, right? And then you had some other things that it failed. It expanded further than it could reach. Its government system didn't allow for it to govern the outer regions of Rome, and so they had some crumbling economies. It became very much a welfare state, dependent upon slave labor and debt. And so it indebted itself. It had a lot of slave labor, and people expected handouts from the government. And eventually the government just couldn't sustain the people, right? It abandoned marriage laws. It had weaker funding because of its welfare state. And so the military wasn't able to be funded. So the Huns and those who wanted to conquer Rome saw this as an opportunity and walked up and just did it. It was simple. And it wasn't because of Christianity. It was because of really poor governance. As a matter of fact, if you do some history studying, you will find that even the reason we talk about Rome today is because Christianity was there to save it from its complete annihilation, and that Christians were the ones who negotiated with foreign pagan countries coming to destroy Rome and allowed for it to be spared. It was Christians who gave healing and hospital care to those in need during the plagues and also during the wars. And so no, the reason we still have a Rome is because of Christianity.
And by that, I haven't talked about the Kreuzzüge, about the Hexenverbrennungen, the invention of hell, what a sick and pervert idea. I haven't talked about Luther and his unrivaled and raging anti-Semitism. I haven't talked about Hitler and his birthday party for Luther called the Reichskristallnacht.
Phil, Hitler was not a Lutheran. He leveraged religion to accomplish his will. He used it and perverted it. He crafted the message and made sure it was on point in order to pervert the German people. And he used God and he used God's name in vain in order to accomplish his tasks and the wicked things he wanted to do with the Germans and through the Germans. It was not because he was a faithful Lutheran Christian, right? As a matter of fact, there are in history, you can see that there's two different churches in World War II Germany and a little prior, and it was the government-run church, right, that taught the message of Hitler, that did the things that Hitler told it to do, and then there was an underground church. One of the most prominent religious leaders of the underground church was a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he led the underground church that was being faithful with the gospel, and he was eventually assassinated. He was eventually killed at the very end of the war because of his works against Hitler and everything he did for the gospel. So no, Hitler was not a Lutheran.
I haven't talked about the Reichskonkordat or the sexual abuse, because all that is the history of religion, and by now I shall proceed to the present of religion, which is completely different from cruelty and stupidity and terror, and completely different in terms of exactly the same, actually. I know there's millions and millions of religious people living in peace and harmony with their brothers and sisters in faith. And I'm going to read a list of names to you, and let's find out what they all have in common, okay? That is Vladimir Putin, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, Jaroslav Kaczynski, Alexander Gauland, Marine Le Pen, Horst Seehofer. This international gang of nationalists are all religious. I'm not saying that every religious politician is right-winged, but every right-winged politician seems to be religious. They are using religion to create hate to other religious people. And let's take the Middle East conflict, okay? When I was born 28 years ago, there was the Middle East conflict, and in these 28 years, it hasn't become any better. No, it has become worse. And I am pretty sure that as long as people consider themselves to be Jew first, or Muslim first, or Christian first, not human first, there is no chance for peace on this world. Religion...
Months ago, I was walking through the streets of Old Town Jerusalem, headed to the Western Wall at night with a small group of people. And as we walked through these streets, these dark streets at night through the old city, Ramadan was wrapping up. Muslims were pouring into these small, narrow streets, hungry because they've been fasting. At the same time, Jewish people were celebrating, or recognizing, I should say, their Memorial Day. It was a very interesting, difficult time. And so here you have a small group of Christians walking through these narrow streets, and you have Orthodox Jews and less Orthodox Jews, and then you have Muslims, young, old, us. I mean, all these people, this conglomerate of religions walking through the streets of Israel, right? Nobody was stabbed, nobody was killed, nobody was gassed, nobody was punched, nobody was hit, there wasn't a fight, nothing happened. We walked through those streets peacefully. And all of us would say our way is the only way. And yet, we never saw any violence. Now, are there extremists? Yes, there are. There certainly are. But that is not the case for every single person. Many of us just want to live in peace. Many of us believe our prophet or our Savior preached peace. And so we follow that peace and try to practice it with others. And so it's not true that until we get rid of all religion, we're not going to have peace. In fact, it's just not a good, clean statement. And it's exactly the opposite, if you ask me. The more we understand our religion and the deeper we go with our faith, the more peace we will have.
Religion, it sadly appears, is an eternal source for hate and war. And you think this is exaggerated? No. Take a look at the Western Europe in the 21st century. We have the least relevance of religion, and at the same time the highest rate of peace, of personal freedom, and of prosperity in the whole history of mankind.
Phil, the reason our countries are great, the reason Germany's great, the reason my country's great in America, and maybe other English countries, European countries are great, is because of our foundation of Christianity, the foundation of Judeo-Christian beliefs that taught you not to steal, not to be a liar, not to be a cheater, that taught you traditional marriage norms, right? So you don't commit adultery or have multiple wives. It's these practices that are embedded deep inside of your culture, you don't even realize they're there, that allow for our countries to be prosperous. Now, it is eroding, but it's not because people in your country are not Christians anymore. As a matter of fact, the reason people in Germany are not Christians anymore, the reason that there's fewer Christians in Germany, is because during World War II, so just a generation ago, Christians and Jews alike fled your country. They got out of there because they were being killed for their faith. And so you're left with a generation of SS. I mean, that's really what you get some underground church people, but predominantly Germany is left with a bunch of people who followed Hitler, right? And so that's your foundation, and it's rebuilding into a Christian foundation. In fact, people are becoming Christians in Germany. It's really, really cool. But that's the reason your country is great is not because there's less Christians. The reason it's great is because 70 years ago, you were a Christian nation. Like, you read the Bible in school. Like, you were faithful to the Bible, and that is embedded in our two countries. And you're about to talk about the Middle East and how if you go there, it'll be different. And you're right, because they're not Christians. They are based on a different kind of religion, and those religions are not as peaceful and not as loving as a Judeo-Christian religion is. So yes, you are correct in establishing the fact, or at least acknowledging the idea or the fact that those two nations, our nations or our peoples, are different from other peoples, but it's based on our foundation of who we are, not on anything else.
You want to bet? Get on a plane, fly to any Islamic state, and you'll see that you will land right in the Middle Ages, only with Wi-Fi and ABC weapons. And even in the heart of Europe, there is one country where the separation between the state and religion is not finished at all. And that, of course, is the Church Republic of Germany, where the church taxes are withdrawn by the government, where employment laws do not apply to religious social institutions. And they are also paid 98% by the state. So thank you, God, for 2%, and that the so-called inventors of charity are allowed to fire Jews, Muslims, atheists, and homosexuals for no reason. We have laws for circumcision. We have laws for euthanasia. We have actually so many laws that are based on religious things that you could say that from the cradle to the grave we are escorted by religion. And that in a country where 80%, for example, says in terms of euthanasia, say, hey, there's only one person that decides about my death, and that is myself. No politician, no doctor, and no priest. And still, the German court has ratified a law that criminalizes euthanasia. But there's another enemy right now for the open and modern society. And also, if that sentence could make me false, friends, I'll still say it. Some of the cultural and religious elements of Islam are just not compatible with a modern society. It is like that. I'm very sorry for that, but it is just like that. Religious self-determination, women's rights, secular legal system, just to name 3 things, those are not compatible with Islam. It's just like that.
It's just like that. Again, his qualifying statement, it's just like that. Okay. That's a horrible qualifying statement. So, but let's talk about this. It kind of went on a little tirade about German government and separation of church and state, and I don't know if you caught it all, but he was really upset with the idea that a Christian church or ministry would not hire somebody based on gender identity or these other issues, or because they're from a different faith. And then he starts talking about how Islam's faith is incompatible with modern culture. And so he believes that, follow this logic, he believes that it's okay for atheist modern culture or German modern culture or whatever his culture is to cast out the Muslim because it doesn't agree with his culture, right? That's what he said. However, just before that, he said it's not okay for Christians to cast out people who don't agree, or to not identify with people who don't agree with their faith and convictions. So it's okay for Phil and his tribe to throw out whoever they want to throw out based on their beliefs, but it's not okay for other tribes to have convictions that allow for them to govern who they hire and so forth. We're going to start seeing this over more and more often in his talk. He's going to become more and more hypocritical. He's going to judge religions, all right, and then he's going to do the exact same thing. His hypocrisy is going to be on display, so watch out for it. It's really quite fascinating.
And that rise of that Islam again empowers the original haters of freedom, which are the Christian right wings. So living in Europe by today, you could think that you are surrounded by conservative assholes and religious maniacs. But it's not like that. They are just louder, but we are more. By the time of World War II, 99% of the people in Germany were Christians. And by today, 26.5% are Protestants and 28.5% are Catholic, while a whopping 36% are not in organized faith at all. 12% are active believers in Germany, and 82% say, I am happy without God in Europe. So it's not true that you are surrounded. We actually surround them. We just have to get better politics.
Yes, Phil, you're right. Prior to World War II, your country was Christian. You used Luther's Bibles in your schools to educate your children. That's how they learned English, from the Lutheran Bible. So you are absolutely correct that Germany prior to World War II was Christian. You think Hitler educated it out of him? No, he didn't educate it out of them. You think your schools educated it out of people, that they somehow got really, really smart and less people were Christians? No, that's not what happened at all. But it does go back to Hitler. During World War II, what happened? I'll tell you what happened. Genocide of the Jewish nation. And we have story after story of Christians protecting the Jews. And they were being killed for that. And Jews were being killed for that. So you see over and over and over again, people of faith leaving your country, fleeing it. And where did they go? They came to America. They went to Europe. They went to anywhere they could. They went to London. They went to where they could be safe, away from the tyranny of a horrible man. And so the reason your country has very few Christians in it is because when all the dust settled after World War II, nobody came back. Or maybe a few people came back. But most of them, including like Einstein and others, stayed in America or stayed in the country that they ran to. Nobody wanted to go to a devastated country after World War II. And so Germany was then left with rebuilding mostly from an SS state. People who had followed Hitler are the foundation now of your country. And the reason you see those numbers is because you pretty much lost a generation of Christianity. The fact that you have the Christians that you have is a pretty amazing testimony to the work of the gospel in your country. And I'm willing to bet that that number is going to grow before it shrinks.
And this is where I want to start to talk about the future of religion. Actually, this presentation could have been like sex with a Catholic priest, quick and dirty. I would have shown you a white screen and say, this is how I imagine the future of religion. It just doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it sounds hard, but imagine above us only sky, no heaven. Imagine that there would be no terror and no silly prayers against the terror that was evoked by prayers in the first place. No more Middle East conflict, no more amateur choirs with guitars out of tune, no more smug-faced priests nourished by society, contributing nothing else but incomprehensible nonsense and ethical ideas from the past. Doesn't sound that like paradise to you?
What he does here is called deconstruction. And so it's a very common thing that's done with communicators, where they deconstruct something, but they don't reconstruct anything in its place. And so he's deconstructing the future of religion, but he offers no alternative to the deconstruction. So he's just eliminated religion, but it offers us no, like, what are you going to do? It's like, what's going to be in its place? So let's play it out. If you do deconstruct religion, if you were to remove religion from the culture completely, what would be in its place? What would govern people? Right? Not saying that religion governs people. What would guide us? What would be our morals and norms? Where would we get that? If we didn't get it from the Bible or from our culture, like, how would that happen? So the most logical conclusion is it would happen from government. In fact, that's what we see from atheist governments. North Korea, China, Hitler's Germany, we see atheist governments guiding people, telling us what to believe, telling us what our norms and mores are, right? They establish, they tell us how many children we can have, how many children we shouldn't have. They tell us what rules to follow, who to worship and what to worship and how to worship, right? So they do all that. But then what will govern us personally? So it can't be love, because that's Christian. So you can't touch, don't do that. You don't want to be Christian. So let's not steal love. It can't be that. It can't be world domination. That's other religion, right? And you can't be karma. It can't be this for that. That's Buddhism, right? So it can't be all these other religions. So you kind of have to have like make sure you're not like the other religions, because Russia did this too in the French Revolution. After the French did this after the Revolution, so they tried to become atheistic states. They even tried to eliminate the 7-day work week because it was too Judeo-Christian to have a 7-day work week. And guess what? It all failed. They had to stick with the 7-day work week because it's the only work week that works. It's the only working system that works. The only way the week works in concert with seasons and lunar rotation and the sun and all that. It is amazing. So anyway, all to say, what is going to guide us? Well, we're already seeing it today in our culture, but probably the best idea of what would guide us if we took out religion would be self. It's reasonable to think that self could guide us and we would just want to be our best selves. I know I would want to be. And so to be my best self means I need to be probably the strongest I can possibly be at my age, middle-aged man. I need to be as strong as possible because I want to validate myself and take care of myself. I need to be free from any hindrances. So not too many kids, maybe not a wife, because I need to take care of myself, right? So I don't need to have commitments that might cause me to sacrifice myself, right? So let's get rid of some marriage and get rid of parenting or faithful fathers so we can take care of ourselves, right? So that's not going to go well. In fact, we can look at the prison system in America and see where that leads us. When you take fathers out of the picture and the faithfulness of families, that's what fills most prisons is fatherless children, if you do the data and research. But it's okay because I'm going to be my best self, and self is what's going to guide us. And ultimately, I'm going to probably need the most money so I can be, again, the best self. So I'm going to need as much money as possible to take care of myself. And so what you've created then is an atheistic state that values self. Sounds right, although it eliminates faithful marriage, it eliminates faithful husbands, it eliminates faithful wives, it eliminates strong family bonds, which will eliminate any kind of cultural stability. But it'll do more than that. It will also eliminate the weaker, because the weaker brings me down. It'll bring our whole culture down. If we have weak people in our country, our whole country could fail, and it's all about the self. So we need to get rid of all the people who are handicapped mentally or physically, and we need to remove them from our society so we can be the best selves we can possibly be. That's where this scenario, without religion, without love, without sacrificial love, that's where this scenario will take us. And it's interesting because Hitler did exactly that. Again, it's so fascinating that this comes from a German speaker, German communicator in Germany, and he's promoting a system that would eventually probably lead to a Hitler-esque government, where Hitler tried to get rid of all of the crippled, all of the mentally handicapped. He tried to get rid of anybody with special abilities or disabilities, He tried to get rid of all of these different types of people because they didn't fit his system. Anybody of a different religion and a different race. He was a racist pig. That was Hitler Germany. It was racism and it was hateful, right? And that's exactly where this non-religious system is going to take you in the end.
Well, to me, it does, honestly. And I find it quite ironic that the absence of the ideology that told us that will bring us paradise is bringing us paradise. I was reading a story about a guy who he was brought up as a Jehovah's Witnesses, no birthday, no blood transfusion, and they really believe that one day Jesus will come and save them and kill everyone else. And you know how he got healed from this form of mental illness? By information. He read a Wikipedia article about his own religion. And that's so simple. And later he wrote a book and he found out that the more internet we have, the less religious we get.
Phil has a God. Did you hear it? He just talked about it. Phil's God is information. It's information. He says, gather information and you will be set free. You'll have all your answers. You'll be like this JW who, Jehovah Witness, who researched his religion and realized how ludicrous it was and left it. And you know what? I would have left it too. I would have left Mormonism. I would have left Buddhism. I would have left Hinduism. I would have left Mormonism. I would have left all those religions too if I was left with them. There's no way I could have followed them. I would have left Islam. If I'd done any kind of research with those religions, I would have left those religions. However, I have been through the depths of doubt with Christianity, and I can tell you, the more you research and the more you study, if you're willing to continue to study. Now, you can always find somebody who's out there who's going to be on the fringe saying things that are ridiculous and unverified, like Phil here today. But if you continue to study the sciences, study history, study philosophy, study nature, continue to study even theology, go deep and deep and deep and deeper, you will find out on the other side, it all leads us back to the one true God of Jewish Christian faith. It will. It'll eventually take you right back there. So yes, Christian, wake up and study. Wake up and study deep and look into these things. Don't let somebody just speak them over you. You study and you study deep. Don't let your faith be shallow anymore. And you go deeper in your faith, and you will find at the other side is God waiting for you.
Information seems to be the best remedy against religion. And so, I know it sounds super religious, but that guy called the moment where he read that article his awakening. And this is actually what I wish for religious people to wake up. I'm not saying you're foolish, but you obviously have been fooled. And that by a system which doesn't serve you, but only the leaders. My idea would be that you should read something about religion, and maybe about a very different religion from yours. And by one day, there will be this moment where you think, wow, this is a super weird religion. And this is exactly how I feel about your religion. That's empathy. To be honest, I hope for religion to slowly disappear and be replaced by a rational system that enables 8 billion people to live together in peace on this world. I am really hoping that. But who am I? Who are we, the professional atheists, the secular humanists, to have a naive wish like this? But before we continue making the same religious mistakes we have done in 2,000 and more years, I have an idea. Or maybe I should call it an urgent suggestion. Why don't we make religion just a private matter? This is my suggestion. Why don't we see religion even as a thing of intimacy? Imagine religion, as an internet meme says, like a penis. It's okay to have one. It's okay not to have one. It's even okay to be proud of it, but please, don't swing it around in public. Don't write any laws with it, and leave my kids alone with it. It's very simple.
Okay, metaphorically now speaking, why do you get to throw yours around, right? Why do you get to have your opinion about matters and nobody else can? Again, we see the hypocrisy of his atheism on full display. He can talk. He's allowed to say what he wants to say, but nobody else can. He can show off his, privates, whatever, but nobody else can. Right? Not that anybody should. But he's allowed to do these things and nobody else is. And again, it's hypocrisy. Only his way matters, and nobody else is allowed to have a voice at the table. And I think that's ridiculous.
I think we can agree on that, can't we? Because in this way, everybody wins. The religious people can keep their God or gods or holy camole, and we are just don't have to take care about it, really. It's that simple. I mean, we don't want to hear your church bells ring on Sunday morning or your imam sing 5 times a day. Get a bloody Bluetooth speaker. It's that simple. I know. Religion as a private matter is the opposite of what religious leaders want, because that way they would lose their job, but this is exactly what I aim on.
Phil, you are a professional atheist. You make a living off of atheism. You make a living off of the generous donations of people to the atheist movement, and now you're calling Christians or Muslims or any other religious leader bad, wicked, evil, perverted, destructive, because they are promoting their religion to make money. That's literally what you do. You are, again, being a hypocrite. And can I just tell you, now I know there are some people who pervert this and get totally loaded off of their religion, but that is not the majority. Most of us who are serving in the ministry capacity, because we do it because we love Jesus, we don't do it to make millions of dollars and to be super rich. We do this because we love God, not because we love money.
They're still trying to tell us that religion is the remedy for all of humanity's problems. Guys, it hasn't worked in 2,000 years, and it won't work in the future. I'm pretty sure. Thank you. Or as my friend Michael Schmidt-Salomon says, whose birthday is today, so happy birthday, Michael, we should kill bad ideas before bad ideas kill people. And to the politicians, you have probably bet on the lame horse for much too long, because being religious is no longer a guarantee for good votes. I really think we live in wild times. There's climate change, there is populism, nationalism, there is protectionism, there is digitalization. Do you think prayers will help? No, I think if we want a future of humanity, the future of religion must be a private matter. Thank you.
He says so much at the end. If I kept hitting him, it would take too long, and so we're going to wrap it up here right now. But here's the gist of Phil's thesis, if you will. His great solution for the future of religion is to silence any ideology that does not agree with the atheist ideology. He believes that he should be the only one that has a voice and a seat at the table, or his atheist friends and tribe should be the only ones that have a seat at the table to get to speak into culture, religion, community, art. All those things should be based around atheism and nothing else. And that's what he wants. That's what would make him happy. And if we were to do that, then the whole world would be perfect. And again, all he's done is traded one religion for the other. He makes a living off of donations. He is a professional person who's preaching a sermon, who's eulogizing, who's sharing his gospel. He is simply the propagander of another form of religion. He's creating, or part of a movement to create another religion, which is atheism. Its God is information. Its savior is government, and its worship is through the internet. I mean, that's it. It's just another religion that seems more modern, and so he's just swapping one for the other at the end of the day. So this is very common amongst atheists. It's a very common atheistic position. It really takes us no further down the road. What we have to recognize then is this: the world is smaller. It is becoming more and more globalized. It is becoming more and more informed, and we're learning that people are different all over the world, and that we can't have it our way. We can't just say our way is the only way. We have to respect that there's other people out there, and we need to be willing to listen. We need to be willing to listen to atheists, Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, Jews, and alike. Everybody deserves a right to be heard and respected, no matter what their ideology is. Now, I do believe that my faith is the right faith, but I don't want to silence anybody's faith. They have the right to speak about theirs. And I think in conversation, maybe even I could convince them that my faith was better for them or more correct than their faith. But that's beside the point. At the end of the day, we have to not buy into this belief that we have to silence people because they disagree with us. That is a position of insecurity, and it's a position of fear, and it's the position that Phil presents today. And it's a position, sadly, I hear from many, many atheists: fear and insecurity. Well, that wraps up today's this month's session on denying atheism. Don't forget to subscribe so you can catch next month's Christmas special from Christopher Hitchens on his claims to atheism and his denial of Christianity. It'll be super fun. Thanks again for watching.